Hello and welcome to this week's episode of FireDEV, a fireside chat with people in the industry. Today, my guest is Russ Olsen. Russ, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How's the weather where you?
Is absolutely gorgeous here. I live just outside of Washington, D.C. in the United States, and it is a beautiful fall day.
No, that's good. Like, how's the weather year round, or does it change throughout the year like UK?
It's just so unfair because the DC summers are pretty awful. It is really hot and humid here in the summertime, and then it gets quite cold in the winter. So that just seems completely unfair. But it's there's the old expression that if you don't like the weather, wait a while. That's kind of the DC weather.
I wish that was the same in the UK. It's like if you don't like it, don't worry. You're gonna wish it was the way it was 10 minutes ago because it's probably gonna get worse. Like all summer, our weather has been pretty bad. Like everyone in the UK just considers this not to have been a summer. It's like it's been that bad, and it's funny because we're in October now. In September, like mid to late September, we actually had a few mid 20-degree, decent days. And it's like, I thought summer was over, but then it's come back. And like today's day is actually pretty decent. I haven't checked the weather, but I was just out, with shorts and a t shirt. I had to quickly pop out. And I didn't really feel uncomfortable. Just to quickly pop
Hmm.
out with shorts and a t-shirt. So it's probably, I say, low 20s, and I've heard it's meant to get as high as 24 the next week or so as well. So it's just like we wanted this weather, in the actual summer, not in fall.
Right, right.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Russ. So, what are you working on right now, and your background.
Sure. Well, let me start with the past because I have an awful lot of it. I started programming professionally in the very early 1980s. And I was doing mechanical engineering, and it turned out that I had started doing mechanical engineering right around the time where the idea of using computers in everyday engineering was just seeping into the industry. So, as sort of the young person right out of university who was interested in computers, that was I got all of that work because most of my colleagues had no idea. Very different world. Since then, I worked whole series of things. I did CAD CAM and GIS systems for a long time. I did enterprise integration. And I've kind of bounced back and forth between being a working programmer and a manager. So sometimes I'm a manager and sometimes I work for a living. Um, and
Find that pretty funny,
just
but I know what you mean.
um, just recently, I have departed from Nubank, which is a very large e-bank in Brazil. Very, very prominent institution in Brazil. People love Nubank in Brazil, and Nubank has spread out to Mexico and Colombia. Um, but as I say, I've just sort of ended my time with Nubank. To go back to one of the things that I really love doing, which is I've written a few computer books. I wrote a couple of books on Ruby, and I wrote a book on the programming language Clojure. And I think I'm going to spend at least the next 6 months or so doing some writing and just kind of unwinding from the intensity of working for a startup that had just gone public. Uh, so, so that's me. I don't know. I suppose I could talk about myself all day, but
That's what you'll be doing, but I'll ask some, specific questions. So, what was, coding like in the 80s, like 40 years ago? So,
oh god.
what's changed and what's surprisingly stayed the same?
So physically, kind of the actual act of programming back then was just wildly different. Um, uh, so my early days of programming, I sort of used what even then was an outmoded, sort of obsolete technology, which is punch cards, where you were sitting at this machine and writing your program by typing into this machine. And instead of like going to the computer or something like that, it's actually punching holes in a physical card, sort of I don't know, maybe 15 centimeters by 10 centimeters, something like that. I'm not really, my metric escapes me. And anyway, you would end up with this huge stack of cards that you would give to the people who were allowed to touch the computer, and they would run your program, and you would get this huge pile of paper back, which probably said, there's a syntax error on card number 44. And then you'd start all over again. You'd find that card and punch it again. And so imagine building programs where the turnaround cycle between, oh, I want to compile this and seeing your error is maybe 10 minutes. So you had to really want to program. But that was sort of the early days. And pretty rapidly we got to dumb CRT terminals, which everyone kind of looks down on now, and were just like a gift from God back then compared to punch cards. So all of that, and the computers were slow, small, and wildly expensive. Even when I started, I think an Apple II, so an 8-bit Apple, was maybe, oh, I don't know, $800, which probably equates to $5,000 today, something like that. So phenomenally expensive. And then the mainframes that I was working on were in the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. But organizationally, it was also different too, because people fundamentally did not understand how to write code. Like, just like the social act, like how you behaved in writing code, looking back on it, we didn't realize it was a team sport. Like, we thought we could divide up any big job, and if there were 5 people in the team, each person would go back to their office and work for months on their part of the program. And then somehow we imagined that, in the last week or something of the project, we'd all come together and put it all together, and it would just work. And you can imagine how that worked out.
Oh yeah.
I can actually remember sitting with another programmer who was having trouble with a bug, trying to help him fix his bug, and my boss coming by and gently telling me to get back to work. Right? We just didn't understand how this thing was, how it was supposed to. How could we? Right? It was brand new. So
Yeah, I can imagine. Obviously, the sort of, previously, if you was over at somebody's desk, I'm guessing, before this, this type of work was invented, it was probably seen as just, mingling, social
right,
interaction, and he wasn't, doing work. Because especially, if you're working at a company where the work itself isn't that creative or problem solving, and it's really a matter of just raw hours. Like, if you're laying bricks, for example, obviously having an extra person helps, but it'll probably just help if they're just laying the other
right.
wall and you're doing your wall. Like, them just standing there and talking to you is probably not going to be productive unless the brick's super heavy.
So yeah, so the way I think of it again is like is like a team sport versus an individual sport, right? Like, if you're playing golf, right, you can't help the person who's at the tee or whatever, right? They have to do it themselves. And I think that was sort of the image that people had, is it was more like golf, when in fact it's more like football. Your kind of football or my kind of football doesn't matter, right? Where it's a team, and we all have a job, but we're all sort of helping each other, and the team is greater than the sum of, the team can get things done. It's not just 8 or 11 or whatever individual people. But yeah, and I think one of the other things that was different back then, which is you know, there is some advantage to having been around for as long as I have, which is that I know that back then many more, projects failed at a much greater rate than they do today, and which I think is probably surprising to anyone who's ever, like, in the last year or two has lived through something that hasn't worked out all that well. That is a much rarer event than it was back then. I think back then people talked about 70-80% of software projects just flat out failing.
So, like, I mean, what was the reason for them? Was it a technical, like, team based thing? What you was discussing, or was it that people didn't really know what to use the technology for, and it was a bit of a wild west?
So there was, I mean, it's, I think the answer to your question is yes, like all of the above. We didn't understand how to organize software projects, as I was saying. Um, Fundamentally, the programmers, there wasn't this depth of experience that, you know, here's an easy looking problem that in fact everyone in the industry knows is actually very difficult, like interfacing to a third party system. People generally today know that that is probably harder than you think, no matter how hard you think it is. It's, something that's counterintuitively difficult. We didn't know that back then. We didn't realize back then how difficult it is to understand requirements. So, there was a period where the idea was that someone would write a requirements document and you should never ever have to talk to that person because it's all in the document. And of course, we figured out that, like, actually talking to the person who understands the requirements, yeah, that's a valuable thing. We also just had a lot more the code doesn't work kind of things, and I think we've gotten a lot better at writing code that actually works
Mm.
because we've got 40 years more experience doing it.
And better tools as well, because
Yeah, exactly.
like obviously I was born in 1991. I didn't you know I'd say first start coding in 2008 when I went to college at 16 years old. I mean, before that, I think I did a bit of like games programming just at high school, but not at high school, just when I was at high
Right.
school. Actually, not in primary school, even at home, just because I had such an interest in computers and technology and, also gaming. I remember I had this like, I don't think it was called 3D Game Maker, but it was some sort of game maker
Oh
software
yeah,
that
I remember 3D Game Maker. Sure.
yeah, yeah. Do you remember it? Yeah, like you'd get it on a CD or a DVD, and I remember, just messing around with that. And I think maybe something else I did, maybe a bit of coding as well. But but by the time obviously I started coding, IDEs had IntelliSense or something along those lines. Formatting, built-in compilers, debugging tools, all, and then on top of that you had you got plugins now in stuff like VS Code. You've got extra debugging tools as well, whereas I've seen people code online, especially, or heard stories of how they did it back in the days, and they would just write like a whole file, or write a whole application even if it wasn't too big, and then they would run it, and then they would find out if they had errors. They wouldn't see if they had errors as they was going along. It wasn't a matter of, okay, I missed a semicolon, I can see that, the line's gone red. Or, that
Yeah.
line gone red, something wrong there, quick scan, there's a semicolon. Or now you can just hover over it. There'll be a potential suggestion to fix it. Now you can even get plugins for stuff like VS Code to integrate tools like ChatGPT that do an amazing job of, you can get an explanation, you can document it, you can code it, comment it, you can also, get a solution for it, all that sort of stuff. Whereas, back in the days, it's a matter of, you just run it, you see what you get. And like I even heard stories of people that didn't have access to the computer on a regular basis, so they would write the code on paper. I don't know if you ever knew
Yes.
anyone like this, and then they would run it when they had access, like a week later or whenever, and then they would realize, okay, you've got loads of errors, got to go back and fix them.
So the last programming course I took as an undergraduate, we had access to the computer once a week for 4 hours on Wednesday night. Um, think about that. Think about trying to learn. It was actually it was an assembly language programming
Four
course. So
hours
think
each, or 4 hours for the whole class?
for the whole class.
How many people
Um,
was in the class, roughly?
I don't know, 15 or 20, but it wasn't, it was like there were 4 hours where we could submit our programs to, it was a mainframe at the time. So it wasn't like you were fighting over a terminal or something, but it was like there were 4 hours where you could actually interact and find out, if you had a syntax error on line 23, or if your program actually assembled, oh, well, is it doing the thing that I wanted to do? So that this sort of idea of like write the whole program or write the whole file and submit it all at once, it's not crazy if there's a 10-minute turnaround, right? As opposed to I type something wrong on the line and I get the little squiggly red line and I'm like, oh, what was I thinking, right? Think about that taking 10 minutes, you
Yeah, I
know?
can imagine. I remember. I know how it is now. It's easy to complain for people from my generation, where the compilation takes
Yeah,
30 seconds, or some it's going a bit slow, and we've had to do a rebuild, and we're waiting 45 to 60 seconds. It was like, this is wasting so much time, and obviously you're talking about 10, maybe more minutes. Every time. It's not a matter of it happened to have taken longer this time. Instead of the 5 seconds, it's taken 30 seconds.
yeah, yeah. But I think it's also interesting. Lots of things have changed, right? Like the world. I live in the future, right? Lots of things have changed, but as so I did my last major kind of professional programming project as like an individual engineer like 2 or 3 years ago, so not all that long ago, and then I've been managing engineers ever since. um, the things that have stayed the same are equally interesting. So, what stayed the same? We're still struggling to understand requirements, right? I think maybe that will be, in 1,000 years, we'll have super AI, whatever, and people will still struggle to understand requirements. But even more interesting, I think, people still have the same debugging habits frequently as we had back then. Have you ever, again, as a manager, I've occasionally watched people, engineers, struggle to find and fix the bugs in their program. And what we did back then is, the program would do something weird, and we would say, it must be this, and we would fix this, and then no, that wasn't it, and then we'd say, it must be that, and we'd
Yeah,
try that, and
we've done that.
that sounds familiar. People
Yeah,
were doing that back then; they're still doing it today.
yeah. And the problem
Uh,
is sometimes it might end up kind of fixing it or looking like it's fixed it, and either breaking something else, or
right,
it's kind of a fix for the scenario that you happen to be trying at that point. Hence why you're thinking it's that particular file or component, because you're trying a particular scenario, but another scenario doesn't work because you haven't actually fixed the core
right.
issue.
You're fixing the symptoms, not like the root cause, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. I think that was true then. It is still all too frequently true today. I think even more, same kind of phenomenon, but it happens almost exactly as frequently today as it did back then. Is ask an engineer who is not really that experienced with this to optimize a program some way, and you will get a set of random changes sort of on faith, right? Um, and as opposed to why is this program slow? Let me measure where it's actually spending its time. You get, oh, it must be this. Let me improve the performance of this. I just experienced a scenario where a bunch of engineers were trying to speed up a particular process, and they immediately focused on one part of it which turned out to be like 1% of the time, when in fact there was something else that they were not looking at least at first, that was like 40% of the time. So, yes, you can optimize the 1% and maybe get it down to half a percent, but maybe you can optimize the 40% to, you're a lot more likely to have a return on your time by looking at the places where the program is actually consuming the resources. But that, for whatever reason, that is just not our gut reaction. And that is true today. It was true 10 years ago. It was true in 1980.
Yeah, I mean, I think that talks more to maybe a general, problem we have as humans in terms of we want a quick solution. We want to quickly jump to, that solution. It's like, in terms of health, your own body.
Yeah,
Most people, and this is the same thing, with doctors and the medical field as well, is that in a lot of time they're not, tackling the underlying issues, like what actually led you to having this disease or having this problem. Like there's so many basics that so many people don't do. Drink more water, do some basic exercise, nothing intense, but something basic. Positive, mental thinking. Like there's so many things that people just don't do, and I feel like it's not prescribed enough. And that obviously carries over, that mentality into engineering and into coding
yeah,
specifically as well. You just want to say, okay, we've got this problem. It's not logging in, for example. Why is it not logging in? Let's just fix it quickly. There must be a solution, or the problem must be lie in the login. For example, I remember I was just on a doing a contract just recently, and there was an issue with a particular piece of information being displayed in an app that was incorrect. So the scenario was, you would input some information and it would go to a hub. The hub would send it to the back end. It would get stored, and when it was retrieved on the mobile app, it was displaying it incorrectly. And so the bug was raised on the mobile app side. So
yeah.
it seems obvious. It's displaying incorrectly on the app, so it must be a mobile app side. And I remember that was a bug that I actually took online. I was looking into it, and I was like, okay, you're sending a particular ID when you're sending it up. The hub receives that ID. It was an ID of 2025, and that corresponded to a specific device. But when we are getting it, it's displaying the image for and the name of another device type. And I was like, okay, again, it's that thing. If it's displaying that, the mapping of the device ID to the metadata must be incorrect. That wasn't the case. It turned out that the ID that he was getting from the backend happened to be 2000 instead of 2025, and the image and the name that he was displaying for that ID was correct based on the ID that he got. It turned out
Mhm.
there was an issue between the hub and the back end. Some sort of processing had gone on, which was a totally different team to the mobile team. And again, it's that thing. Because it's displayed on mobile, it must be something wrong with the mobile app.
Right,
Again,
right.
it's very easy, thing, mistake to make, but it was just that immediate conclusion instead of some basic investigation of these IDs would have determined, okay, the app is sending it correctly, but the back end, when the app is getting it incorrectly. So between the sending and the retrieval, something's gone wrong, and that's not the app itself.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there is a great example. I think people, when they're either trying to debug things or optimize things, programs, we have a bunch of biases, right? Like, and the biases frequently come out in a sentence that starts with, "Oh, it must be fill in the blank," right? So in
Yes.
your case, it's like it must be the mobile app, but there's general biases like it must be the thing I'm familiar with because it's the thing I'm thinking about right now.
Yes.
Or it must be the most interesting or the hardest part of the program, which is a frequent one. So, how many times, at least in my career, maybe in yours as well, have you like either yourself or other people watched other people like spin and spin and spin trying to find some problem that they are sure is some deep, complicated interaction of the parts, and it turns out to be like an off by one problem over here somewhere, like completely boring, just a little obscure, but you spend a lot of time absolutely convinced this must be some subtle edge case in the algorithm somewhere, because that's the interesting part, you know?
Oh yeah, 100%. I see it all the time. I know I've done it myself. I remember when I was teaching at a university for a year, computer game programming, and I was
Hmm.
teaching C++ for games using OpenGL to final year students. And the student, showed me some code. They showed me, the output. He just wasn't drawing correctly. He was just
Right.
cutting off. And I was just, he had shown me a bunch of stuff, and then he showed me something, and I make YouTube videos, and part of the YouTube video that I opened GeoC, he had actually watched one of my videos, and
Right.
copied the code. I looked at it, I was like, that looks super familiar to me. Like I'm looking at it, and I'm like, go to this particular part. He went to it. I was scanning it, and he turned out he had put, in a for loop, he had put one instead of I. So,
Oh,
so,
yes.
so the index was, always, just comparing against one. So basically, it was stopping as soon as it hit one. So I've been like 0, 1, and then that was it. And he was drawing like a couple of polygons. And I was like, that should be all right. But that's something easy to, miss, when you're quickly looking over it, because I and one on the screen can look really similar. And because he wasn't rendering, he was going to like the rendering file, because it was
Yeah.
because he was also from a model. He was looking at the model as well, the texture. He was like looking at all these things. It's literally a matter of changing the character one to the character I, fix the whole thing.
Yep. And what? So I think my version of that story is I did image processing for a long time, and there was a classic bug that would drive people crazy in image processing that folks that had been around for a while would immediately spot it, and it would be that your image would you'd do some processing on your image, and it would come back, and it would look right from a distance, but if you looked at it closely, like the lines would be chopped up and they wouldn't match and stuff like that. And it was, and I watched people like spend days trying sure that there was something wrong with their image enhancement algorithm or something like that. And what it actually is that they had gotten the endian wrong on the words, so that you know each sort of 8 byte word or whatever in the image was fine, except that individually it was turned around, so it would break up the lines and things like that. And it was typically like a one line fix somewhere to say you've got the wrong endian on your words there. But I think it's all of these things are encapsulated in the words, oh, it must be X, instead of saying, oh, I suspect it's X, let me go check and prove to myself it's X before I spend a long time fixing X.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I, do when there's, like a problem, you can use the debugging tool, but I just personally prefer just to start, printing out some, information. Obviously, if it's, a particular piece of data, start printing out those variables, the arrays, have it, just have a quick look at it and think, okay, does that data look correct? Is it what I would expect it to be?
Yes. Yes.
And if it is, then okay, then the back data is correct. At some stage after the data, something's gone wrong, and then slowly start breaking it down, and like I'll further go into it. Like if there's 10 functions being called, I'll literally just put console logs in each one of them, and I don't put any fancy information. I'll just put like 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 10, and I'll see which functions are being called, and I'll like kind of dry run it, and I'll look at it like realistically 1, 2, 9, and 10 should be called, but only 1, 9, and 10 is called. Why isn't 2 called? Or two's only being
Yeah.
called in this scenario or twice, but the third or fourth time it's not being called. Like, really break it down to the point where you just like, okay, I'm very certain that it is either in this file or related to the like it's a front end issue, it's a back end issue, it's whatever it is.
Yeah, I think of that. I think of what you have just said there exactly as sort of bisecting the world of possibilities. Like something is not working the way I think it should work. So I say, oh, maybe it's X or it's not X. Maybe it's in the server or it's, in the mobile device. Is there some way that I can really like look and see and be sure, oh, the data looks right coming to the mobile device, therefore it must be the mobile device, or the data looks bad coming out of the server, it's probably the server, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to approaching it by saying, must be the server. Yeah, really?
Yeah, like, I see it all the time. I'll be working on a project and like there'll be something wrong, and somebody just quickly, just jump to like we were just talking about the conclusion of it's this. I'm gonna fix this file. I'm gonna fix this, and like sometimes I'll go through my approach, and I'll have people say, you don't need to do that. We've got the data. We know what it is.
Right.
It's like we don't know what it is, and like I'll be printing out some of these arrays, and they'll say, okay, I've got the information, but what they've got is the data that's being received on the server end. It's like I want to know, is that being received correctly on the the
Yeah.
front end? Like those are two very different things, especially if there happens to be processing that also goes on the server end, which with larger, more complex applications, that's pretty much always the case. So there's even more potential problems that can arise just from that. So yeah, seeing what you get it on the server end, great. Especially if, let's say, if it's somebody who's on the back end server team, that's the exposure they have. They give you that information, but then you're checking it in your realm as well and seeing,
Yeah.
okay, it's correct. Therefore, there is probably something the mobile side, and then you can start narrowing it down, from there and to the point where you're like, okay, this is the problem.
Yeah, I will say let me back up and add a caveat, which is that most of the time when there's a bug, we do know where the bug is, right? And we just fix it and we go on with our lives, and it's
Yes,
not
a
a
lot
big
of the
deal.
time.
It's when you get stuck that you need, it's like I have my regular things, and frequently I know where the bug is, and I just fix it, and it's fine. It's like it's when you get stuck, you need to realize, oh, my regular process here is not working. So let me take a breath and start actually gathering data and trying to localize where the problem is, not based on opinions, but based on I've gathered data and this is what the data is telling me because my regular thing is not working.
Yes, exactly. It is those more edge cases where you know you spend hours or sometimes days on it, and scratching your head, and you end up having unraveled the whole clock. You've
Yes.
modified so many different files, and you're looking at it, you're like, what the hell have I just done? Like I don't even know what I've changed, what hasn't been changed at this
Yeah.
point. Uh, You know,
You're you're
I mean, I was going to
you're
say, thankfully nowadays, IDs like VS Code and Xcode and whatnot, they do track your changes. And,
yeah.
obviously, with commits and all that stuff, if you are committing on a regular basis, you can revert stuff. It's not that bad. But the problem is when you start unraveling it so much, you might have changed 20 files, but, 20% of those changes might actually be good changes. You don't want to,
Yeah.
revert all the changes, but you don't specifically know how much of it you really need. Yeah, so that is definitely a big issue. You just start going in, just start breaking the whole thing.
So you've actually just touched on something that I also think is it's not different today from back then, but it is something I've learned just from being around, which is if I asked you, like, what are the absolute, you're coming into a software project with, I don't know, 5 or 10 people, maybe 20 people. Um, what would be like the absolute minimum infrastructure that you would expect in a a real serious software project? And you just touched on one of them right there, which is some kind of source control system, right? I can do commits and things like that. Let me think. What are some of the other continuous integration? Right? Would you work on a software project with, say, 5 people without some kind of continuous integration?
Mm, I mean, continuous integration, as in
I,
constant revision of the project of the app, for example.
just something as straightforward as we have a quick and easy way to build the whole system to see where we are.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, that is what I would want. Obviously, it
Yeah,
depends on the system, because obviously, some systems that may not be practical, but ideally, yes, because you want to be able to have a quick turnaround between you trying something and then you being able to check it.
right. What are some of the other things? I don't know. Like you would probably, even if you are sort of a stick some console logs kind of person in your code, you probably would want a debugger, or at least have the option of having a debugger, right? I mean,
Yeah, one
that's
hundred
yeah,
percent.
yeah,
Having
yeah,
the option there, having it set up so if I do want to try it, I'm not put off by trying it just because it's not set up, and the setup might take 30 minutes. The initial setup. So
yeah,
have it. Like to have it. Maybe even integrate it somehow with a plugin or directly with the IDE as well, or let's say the browser or the app. The mobile device, for example, and yeah, have it ready so I can use it.
right. Or you just mentioned it, right? Having an IDE available is probably something you might want.
I
Okay.
mean, yeah, that's definitely 100%.
Yeah,
Percent.
there you
I
go.
am not writing in. Obviously, I know people did back in the day, but in Notepad or so something along those. Sometimes I'll come across YouTube videos, and they're not that old, or there'll be even new ones, and the coder on the videos, they'll be writing in Notepad or WordPad, and then copying it over to a compiler, and it's just like, really?
So I have okay. Well, let me make the point that I'm driving at, and then we can come back to this. Um, the reason I mention all this stuff, like a debugger and continuous integration, or an easy way to build the system, source control, is that I have been around long enough that I know from personal experience that engineers, including like the majority of engineers on some of the projects that I worked on in the past, hated every single one of those ideas. Okay. So I spent a substantial portion of my early career going to from project to project saying, look, just having your source code in a random assortment of directories does not work. You need some kind of version control, and getting really, really angry blowback from that. Or, look, having a person whose job it is to build the system, because it is so complicated to build the system, we feel like we need to hire a full time person who will 3 times a day run through the manual instructions for how to build this thing, is a bad idea. We should automate that. Okay. And people hated that idea. Um, and it's like every bit of kind of infrastructure and process that we take for granted today to a larger or lesser extent, uh, there was a set of engineers who hated them. I remember the source control argument was always that it was too constraining. What do you mean I have to stop every now and then and essentially save my source code? What if I make a mistake and everyone will be able to see that I made a mistake? Yes, that's the point. And it sounds funny today, but I think it's uh, it is part of who we are as software engineers or developers, is that we tend to be incredibly conservative when it comes to like the fundamental ways that we work, and even ideas that we just accept as, yes, I either can't live with that without that, or it's a good thing that I would like to have. There was a time when people just hated the ideas.
Yeah, I mean, with any tech, obviously this is more specifically within coding that we're talking, but any technical innovation, computers, internet, electricity, cars, whatever it is, there's always a lot of blowback. There's always, for whatever reason, whether it's personal, whether it's business, whether it's, they just don't understand. The use cases may not be strong enough yet. And I think that, can be a very big one sometimes where, you know, using it, especially setting it up, can require a lot of investments, time and money. And it might be like, I can just do it quicker and cheaper, just the way it is. And again, it's not a matter of it being an overnight improvement, but a long term, it could drastically improve, the whole workflow. And this, is a good segue into something else that I wanted to, discuss with you, Russ. And that was, AI tools like ChatGPT. Because have you looked into ChatGPT and other AI tools at all?
I have, and in fact, I just the other day I asked ChatGPT about me, and it was sort of a a happy and sad experience. The happy experience is that ChatGPT, I guess because of the books, actually knew who I was, which was thrilling. The sad thing is that what it knew about me was mostly wrong. So,
Okay,
um,
I'm literally putting it into the Chat GPT, app now. It says Ruby programming language, Eloquent Ruby. Is that one of your books? And
yeah,
design patterns in Ruby.
yeah.
Yeah, and they said involved in speaking at conferences and providing insights into software development practices. That's also
So
true.
far, so good. Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much it. Apart from saying you're a software engineer, author, contributions to the development community, and
So,
that's
so
basically it.
So I got all that, but then I got a fairly detailed resume, which was like 70% incorrect. But I'm okay with it because the resume it cooked up for me was actually much better than my actual resumes.
You should put that one on LinkedIn instead. GPT generated.
um, I think ChatGPT is in the range of I think technologies like ChatGPT are an obvious real step forward. They are,
Yes.
that we can do a thing that we could not do before. But AI technologies have this history of being oversold.
Mm,
Um, and I think ChatGPT, it's a real step forward, but I'm really not worried about our robot masters taking over the world or making us, I don't know. And in fact, what I'm more concerned about is not that ChatGPT will be so much smarter than I am that I will be obsolete, as it is that I'm afraid that the world is about to become as dumb as ChatGPT, because while it is a step forward, it's not, there's in a very fundamental way, there's not a there yet, right? Like it fundamentally does not understand what it's talking about. It's kind of telling you what it has calculated you want to hear. That is not nothing. That is a real step forward. It's not, at least so far, it's not good enough that it's going to like completely change the world in the way that, you read on the front page of the New York Times or something. Um,
no, but I would, before we carry on talking about AI and ChatGPT, I would say anything on the front of any major news
well,
outlet,
there is that.
including the
Yeah.
New York Times, is so sensational they should be taken with a pinch of salt. Anyway,
So
but
what you're saying is that the front page of the New York Times could be written by ChatGPT right now.
no,
At
I
least,
mean, I think ChatGPT will probably do a better job. I mean, up to 2021, and then after that,
yeah.
they will need a plugin. Yeah, but yeah, so yeah, with ChatGPT, obviously, when I'm going to talk about ChatGPT now, I'm generally going to be referring to similar AI tools and the state of
Sure.
AI,
Yeah.
as it is. Because I feel like ChatGPT, the term ChatGPT, is becoming synonymous with how AI is. The way Google is synonymous with
Right.
search, YouTube is synonymous
So
with
the way
video, for example.
Yep, the way aspirin is a painkiller, and I
Exactly.
think I think Hoover is a general vacuum for you. You know.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is. Even though that's an actual company, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I think enough people know about that, but we still call it a Hoover. Like, we'll say, go and grab the Hoover. So sometimes we'll say, go and grab the vacuum cleaner. But yeah, we do just say, Hoover, even though I have,
Yeah.
heard that before, that it is just an actual company. It's like saying, go and grab, the iPhone, but you're talking about an Android.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, aspirin's the same way. It was a brand name for a painkiller.
Mm.
The stuff we call aspirin today.
Okay, that's interesting to know. But yeah, like people do, just take an aspirin. It's like such a generic, term of just painkiller, even though there's so many different types of painkillers. But obviously, that's a separate topic for a
Yeah.
separate podcast, separate day. But yeah, to talking about ChatGPT, obviously when you hear about it in the news and online, you hear about it, taking over jobs, displacing people. Obviously the more extreme cases saying, you're not going to need coders anymore. And you get a lot of people just standing there, just sitting there. They'll be saying it's going to, reduce the cost of creation to virtually zero. You won't need these people. And I think the reality is it's akin to the average person being able to buy a drill or a screwdriver. It does not make them a handyman. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
they'll have the tools and they can buy better tools that will enhance their, construction, their DIY, abilities. But the thing is, that's the key thing there. They still got to have abilities. It's
Yeah.
not going to make them like you can go and buy bricks, you can go and buy, cement, you can go and buy all the tools, but reality is most people aren't going to be able to build a house physically. It's just one, physically they won't be able to do it. They won't have the skills. Two, they won't have the motivation and the discipline to get through it as well. And I think that's the same with ChatGPT. It will enhance. Like if you just look at coding, it will enhance a lot of programmers' lives. One way I leverage it on a regular basis is if there's a generic algorithm that's out there or something, simple, that I may have written multiple times before, but I know it's probably going to take me, 10, 15 minutes to, just to whip up and make sure it's working. I can just get, ChatGPT to, generate it for me and me to quickly test it. And then on top of that, I can use ChatGPT to help comment code to a particular, standard like JSDoc, for example, or to produce, documentation as well. And then, you can give it a format, that sort of stuff that can enhance and save a lot of time, especially time that coders, for example, do not want to spend. Coders don't want to be
Yep. Yep.
commenting, they don't like documenting, all that sort of stuff. ChatGPT can immensely enhance that. And then on top of that, you got plugins that can link in directly with your IDE as well. So I think that's one way that it can, enhance it. Plus, the other thing is, it is, like you said, an inevitability. It's not going to be the way that people are talking about, but it is something that I think you should look into. My recommendation is just go to chat.openai.com, so the OpenAI's ChatGPT interface, and just start using it. Literally, just start using it as your workflow. There's some stuff that you might Google, just put into ChatGPT first, see what happens, have a little conversation. Don't think of going from no ChatGPT in your life to it being the thing. But I feel like after 3 to 6 months, you might realize that it can immensely enhance, your workflow and, what you do, because I use it on a daily basis consistently now.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
just that good.
Yeah. I think so. I think I heard this from my friend Mike Nygaard, who said that ChatGPT is not going to replace programmers, but programmers who know how to use ChatGPT or the other AI technologies are going to replace programmers who don't. And I think that that is a much more likely, I think that's basically what you're saying here.
Yeah, 100%. I 100% agree. And it's like what we or what you said, probably 10, 15 minutes ago, that when some tools like debuggers, IDEs, all this sort of stuff came about, there was a lot of pushback. But
Yep.
the reality is, if you go and get a programming job, and let's say you've got, you're 30 years old, if you have no idea how to use any IDE, how to, use any debugger, and no desire to use a debugger, all that stuff, then you're probably not going to get very far. There might be some legacy systems where you can really thrive, but the average place is going to be like, that's essential as knowing the actual language itself. Like,
So
they
I
ask.
think that's I think that's an interesting point because you were saying that you couldn't live without your IDE, and of course, as sort of an old school Unix programmer, I rarely use IDEs. I just don't find them that helpful. But and I'm not about to go all, oh, you kids have it so easy. It is that over decades I have developed the skills that I think an IDE just supplies to you without a lot of effort, right? So when I look at a code base, I am mentally kind of absorbing where everything is defined. And if I look at a new programming language, I tend to like mentally absorb the syntax and things like that in a very sort of unconscious way, so that for me an IDE is kind of in the way. It's doing something that I can do for myself for the most part, not always, but for the most part, which is why I tend not to reach for them. That does But the problem with that approach is it took me a couple of decades to get there, and we probably, if people don't have to go through that, then probably they shouldn't. If you and it's that kind of. I think that this is the reason that um, when you've got some new bit of technology, the last person you want to ask about it is somebody who looks like me, because maybe I have, like, through great pain and effort, figured a way to get things done without that technology because it hasn't existed. But it does not mean that for the next person coming along, you know, uh, uh, it might not be helpful. It's sort of like, I'm sure there were people in the early days of the internet who knew where everything were and couldn't understand why you needed this Google thing, because obviously they knew where all the stuff was that they needed to know. That was not me. Google was like a godsend to me. I could find the stuff I was looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I see your point, and I actually 100% agree with what you're saying. It is that thing that you spent a couple of decades honing your skills to the point where things are just, second nature. That for someone like me, or even younger than me, because like I said, I'm 31, somebody that's, 20 years old now, it would take them a long time to get to that point where they can just interact, with the code, and they just know everything that the IDE is providing. For example, obviously it can be ID, whatever it is, without having to use it. But the thing is, they're going against 100 other people that are willing to leverage those tools,
Yep,
and as
exactly.
a
Yep,
result, employers, and whether you're running your own business, there'll be other businesses that'll be leveraging those tools, and they'll probably get further ahead than you. So it is a matter of, okay, that's the normal standard now, so therefore that's what you realistically should do. But no, I totally agree, and I've seen that a lot of the time with people that are engineers or were engineers, and they are older and they've been around in the industry for decades. They just approach it in a very different
yep,
way. And as a result, but because they know how to approach it, they don't really need, the particular tool, because, like you said, they just know, using the Google analogy, they just know where to look.
yep,
And because they've slowly developed the skills as, things were growing, it went from being, let's just say a size of 10 units, whatever it is, to 1,000, but because you was learning each unit as you went along, and you've been able to figure out, okay, I only need these 50 units, the other things I can abandon. Everyone else, where there's 1,000 things to learn or 1,000, features or whatever, they need something to filter it. They need some of that assistance. And I think that's what really does help people is, coming up that's new is
Yeah.
the tools. And you'll be, the similar thing with ChatGPT, for example, and AI tools. I think, yes, newer people getting into the industry will 100% not only use it, but I think they'll need to use it because they'll be going against people that aren't. But I think people that are older than me, let's say mid 40s, they'll probably be at a point where if they don't leverage it immensely, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal compared to someone that's 25, 30, 35, because they'll be going against and they'll just be like, and plus also they'll be on platforms and systems that will be created with that in mind, the fact that you can leverage ChatGPT, for example, and as a
Yeah.
result, if they don't leverage it, they'll be at a severe disadvantage.
Well, so I think ChatGPT and related technologies, I think they have the potential. I think they're very rapidly progressing to the point they're to the point like Google, which is no one needs. Maybe it was true 20 years ago or something. No one needs to know how to use Google anymore. It just works, right?
Mm.
It just you type in some stuff and chances are excellent you will find what you're looking for in the first page or two, right? It just works. Um, uh, Douglas Adams, the guy who wrote the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, used to say that technology is what we call the stuff that doesn't actually work very well, right? So I don't know. Right now, ChatGPT is technology, but Google really is not. You just type in the thing and it just works, right? We tend not to think of, I don't know, trains as technology anymore, right?
No, yeah,
But
they just work. They're not on
yeah,
time all the time, but
right,
they do just you do just expect that you'll go to the train station. The ticket booth will work, the card machine will work. You'll go through the scanning of the ticket or whatever it is. Will just work. You'll sit down, like the chairs will
yeah,
perform their function. The doors will open, the wind, like all those little things. They're just part of the everyday world. They're like part of the furniture now that you just expect them to work, and
right.
they do
And
for the most part.
that is, I mean, I in my mind that is the goal of every technology, is to stop being technology, right? Like
Yeah.
when people stop thinking about it, you've won. And we don't really think about Google anymore. You just type in the thing and there it is. I need to find I flew into a different city over the weekend and I didn't know where my hotel was, so what did I do? I just typed it in the Google and that's where I'm going. That kind of thing where you don't really think about it anymore. I think chat, and not all technologies really have that potential. I don't think you're ever going to get a debugger or an IDE that's going to be like that, because it's just what it's doing is too specialized, too complicated.
Mhm.
But something like ChatGPT, where you just sort of say, "Tell me about X," and it tells you everything you need to know about X, I think that's a real possibility.
Oh yeah, like that will, and I don't think it's gonna be that long. Like you're saying, the the growth rate for tools like ChatGPT is insane. Obviously, they've just announced, Dolly, free, their image generator. I don't think it's accessible publicly yet. I want to say, but I know they've announced it, and it's looking pretty, good. I think that one can generate text properly on the images as well. I know that's been a problem with previous image AI generators is even if you give it the text to generate, it starts doing some random characters or different language. Like it's never been the best. But it is getting to the point where it can be a bit more useful. But yeah, like the tech side of it is becoming a lot more usable for the average person and a lot more practical to the point where, like you said, it won't be technical anymore. And as a result, people won't be scared. Like, because right now, it's technical. And if people know about it, they'll be scared to use it because it's a technical thing. But once it's no longer technical and it's just considered easy to use, more people will use it. It's like mobile phones. You get kids, you get the
Yeah,
technical people,
exactly. Yep.
you get old people that would never have been able to use a computer or an old phone, and they're just I see people and they're just swiping away on their phone, and I'm like, those people would never have known how to turn a laptop on
Right.
15 years ago. And whereas now, and part of that is also marketing as well. It's not just pure technical. Sometimes it can be a lot of it can be marketing, but it's got to a point where, like you said, it's not technology anymore. I think that, yeah, I'm trying to think when was the last time I heard a phone in general, in general conversation, in with people, that it was referred to as technology. It's like, oh yeah, it's just a phone, and it works.
Yeah. Yeah. So the phone is not technology, but like an app is technology, right? Like if you need to build an app, yeah, that's technical. But to actually, in the end, that app on that phone, if it's a decent app, right, it's just part of the phone.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's very interesting how things do go from being more technical, but then as they become more technically advanced, they become less technically perceived.
Yeah.
Like it is a matter of ChatGPT becoming more technically advanced for it to become less, perceived as less technical.
Yeah. It's funny. One of my colleagues at the bank ran into a person who, the bank's available in South America, not here in the US, but he ran into somebody who was actually a customer of the bank. And that person said that he really loved the app. And it made me realize, we have like hundreds, couple thousand actually, engineers who are all working on this huge infrastructure, and there's all of this complicated technological stuff going on behind the scenes to move money around and everything. And what it comes out as for the customer is it's the app, and they love the app. Right? And it's it's that like giant funnel of, at the wide end there is all of this amazing technology, but at the narrow end, right there at the phone, it's just kind of part of my phone. Oh, I really like this aspect of my phone.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I've had that exact experience with a banking application myself. I remember I was talking to my cousin, and we was talking about the more challenger, the newer challenger banks, the ones that usually don't have a physical presence, and they're a bit, they're effectively like a technology, a fintech company,
Yep.
and they're new. The app works really well, and it's just a pleasant experience. It's like, it's not technical, like you said. It's
Right.
just
Right.
pleasant experience. Like, you go on there to do something, it just works. You can get out of the app what you would logically expect to be able to get out of the app in the logical amount of time, in the logical amount of steps. Like, you have in your head like a rough idea of how you want it to go down, whatever it is. It's like, if you gonna walk a mile, that's not gonna be one step. Like, you have an
Right.
idea of, like, okay, you'll be up to this building probably. And like, with these applications, and it's so simple. It's like, we were sending money, and I would send it, and straight away it would ping up on my cousin's phone, for example, and it'd be like, this is the way it should be. And it's crazy that there are so many other more retail banks that it doesn't appear straight away, and you're for 30 seconds refreshing the page, your account, just see if the
Yep.
money's appeared. And where you got these other ones, it just appears, and you get a notification as well, because not all of them give you a notification, the more typical big banks. And it's like, this is just how it should be. It's a pleasant, non-technical experience, but like you said, behind the scenes, there's definitely a lot of technology going on.
Yeah, it's funny. I think of it, since I did spend a lot of my life going to physical banks. I think of like, the ideal online banking thing is, I open the app on my phone and it's just like going to the bank, except I don't have to go to the bank, right? I can just get money or move money around or whatever, pay my bills or whatever. And, of course, at a certain point, I guess long since past, right? Depending on your age, you've never really spent a lot of time in a physical bank, but you're still getting that experience. It's like doing my thing without having to move away from my phone.
Yeah, I mean, I have been to a physical bank. I mean, a lot in my life,
Sure.
especially
Yeah.
earlier on, and especially when I used to go like with my mom or my nan, for example, as well. So I've had a lot, either direct or indirect. I've had a lot of exposure, but I 100% agree. If I have the option not to go and do it via the app, I 100% prefer to do that. And again, not me physically, but I remember people talking about and seeing other people do it, a time where if you wanted to get a mortgage, you had to set up a bank meeting. Like that
Yes.
that was the only way. You had to be with one of the bank managers, had to be at a specific time. If you didn't have all the documentation, you would have to, reschedule, or all that sort of stuff. And now, you just ring up or you just email, or sometimes these banks or the mortgage brokers, they have a platform that you can just like message on, and when the other person's available, they'll message you. They'll put on their documents that they request. You can upload documents, you can see documents that the bank's giving, all that stuff. Like, there's so much back and forth. It's just so much easier. I remember the first time I discovered that you could scan a check using the mobile app, and
Right.
I was like, it's come a long way in terms of it, being able to work. But I was like, no way, like I don't have to go to the bank to deposit this check, especially when the check's not that much. But
Yeah.
it's like that's the most annoying one. It's like when it's not that much, maybe you've had a rebate from something, but it's just annoying to have to go to the bank, spending like 45 minutes out of your day just to go and deposit £10. But it's just like, it's not free money, but it's my money. I want to do it, but with the app, you just get two pictures, one front, one back, and it just deposits it. And it's like, did that actually work? And when you see it, it's such an amazing feeling compared to having to go into the branch itself.
Yep. Yeah. It's yeah. I don't. I think you've sort of captured the feeling of like feeling the world shifting a little bit with technology. Like we say, right? It's what we say. We say, the world changes with technology, but I always sort of think the world changes when technology just becomes boring and part of the landscape.
Yeah, just easy to use, usually like a particular technology synonymous with the activity itself, and almost becomes the verb, like it's the technical term, like googling. It is
Yep.
just I'll literally just better say it again. It's just googling it, but it's searching for it online, and you just don't really think about it. It's so easy just to use it and leverage it.
Yeah, it's interesting that I think so. So I've spent a lot of my career, probably because I have a really short attention span, but I've spent a lot of my career helping software teams adopt new technologies. Right, so everything from, I don't know, like in those early days, source control and continuous integration, which just sounds silly now, to uh, lately I've been kind of advocating for functional programming, and it's interesting. The hardest technologies to explain to uh, are the ones that almost work the best, and I think functional programming is along those lines. And the challenge is that once you really get functional programming, and so once it sort of stops being technology for you, if you will, um, it's your point of view changes, and it's hard for programmers who really understand functional programming to explain it to people who are trying to learn it. And I think that that is a common thing that happens uh, in when we take technological steps forward is that the people who get it, their worldview changes. And it's similar to, what if I've never gone into a bank? I have no idea what you're talking about with the checks and things like that. It would be hard for me to explain the advantages of online banking to someone who doesn't get it. If I'm completely enveloped in it, there's an there's an old saying, or an old story where someone goes to a goldfish and says, "Well, tell me about water," and the goldfish says, "What's water?" Right? The goldfish would be the last entity to know about water because it's just there all the time. And I think functional programming is at least the latest version of that, with for me in the programming world, in that the people who really get it have a really hard time explaining why, because their worldview changes.
Oh yeah, and I think that analogy is talking about fish and the water. I bet you certain fish and certain creatures in the sea there, especially the ones that have you know more developed brains and communication systems, they probably have a term or communication method for outside of the water. Like above water, it's just like that's the bad place. Don't
Right.
go there
Yes.
because if you go there, I don't know what they say if you can't breathe, but like they'll probably be like, thinking that if you go there, that's where it feels like you're gonna die, or it just doesn't feel pleasant. Obviously, I don't know how cognitively advanced they are to be able to process what's happening if they go out of water.
Right. But if
They
we
know it
lived in
doesn't feel nice.
Yeah, if people lived in water, we would have a term for the bad place where there's no water. Yeah.
Yeah,
Kind of
we
like,
would.
yeah, like the vacuum of space, right? We have a term for that because it's the bad place where you don't want to go without the proper equipment.
No, no, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very strange one, and I love when you was talking about how a person now that's growing up won't grasp the gravity of being able to use your mobile phone for banking. Like, imagine trying to tell a kid now or someone that's like 18 now, so they've grown up with the mobile application, with mobile devices, with tablets, with obviously the internet and everything else, to that there was a time where you would get a check, you would go to the bank, you would have to go between like 9 and 5, but obviously you're at work, so you go at lunchtime, for example, and then you'll be waiting in the queue because everyone's going at lunchtime. You'll be waiting 30 minutes, and then they would deposit your check, and then it might take 3 to 5 days for it to come into your account, and they'll probably just look at you. I bet there'll be
Right.
people out there that'll think you're joking. Like, this can't be as bad as you're making it sound.
Well, all I've got to say to you is I don't know where you live, but the banks here close at 3. So,
Oh, I mean, it's not that bad, yeah.
so
Yeah.
yes.
I always found that so insane. And then they would have immensely limited hours on the weekend, and it's just like that's the only time that most people have to access it. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think we're actually talking more about monopolies than banking at this point.
Yes, because they know that you need their service, so you're gonna make time out of your day. Like,
Right.
I look for like banking hours. If they had you up to like 7 p.m., that would be so practical. Those extra 2 hours after 5 p.m. for so many people, you would definitely be rushed at that 5 to 7 p.m. Maybe even open a little later. Like, they could have. I think that'd be more beneficial. But like you said, because they have a monopoly over that market, now it's kind of changing with some of the challenger banks, but even then, that's only to an extent, because I know a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
the average person will be like, I only want to go with my Barclays or the HSBCs or whatever's in America, Wells Fargo and whatnot. They only want to go to the names they know. So there's also that issue still.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're a author. You've wrote books. Do you publish them yourselves, or do you have a publisher that you work with?
So I've worked with two different publishers. So yes, I have publishers. The first couple of books were done with a very traditional publisher, Addison Wesley. They make textbooks and things like that. And then and that was everything you've ever heard about working with a big publisher, good and bad. But the third book I did with the Pragmatic Press, which I don't know if you're familiar, but it is a publishing company founded by software engineers. And that was a much more pleasant and I think equitable experience. Wish I had thought of it sooner. So yeah, I think at some point I may try self-publishing books. But one of the things I tell people, everyone I've ever worked with at some point or another has asked me some form of the question, how could you possibly be an author and not be able to spell? Because my spelling tends to be imaginative. And the answer is, well, if you're an author, you have people who check that kind of stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and
You hope they check it. They
yeah,
don't
they
always.
well, they're much better at it than I am.
Yes.
But so self-publishing, obviously I would have to find someone who could check my spelling and grammar. One of my early books, I think I had exhausted the copy editor, who is the person who sort of checks for the grammatical and spelling errors, and I had used a relatively rare word, and in the manuscript she circled the word and said, hey, this is a real word. Like, she looked at it and she's like, obviously he's misspelled this word because he's misspelled 20,000 other words. But so
Yeah, that's the problem. It's like that story, of the boy who cried wolf.
yes.
That one time your word is actually real, but the average person won't have heard of it. They're like, well, he's made so many other mistakes. This clearly, this word that I can barely probably pronounce is clearly incorrect as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So there you go. Rolling back to the AI, I am sure that copy editing is the kind of thing that uh, AI can eventually fix. Obviously I use spell checkers and things like that, but my bad spelling is much more ingenious than the current crop of spelling checkers. So,
Yeah, I
but I
think
have hopes.
Yeah, I think tools like ChatGPT is definitely going to help there, and I think that's a interesting thing. You've raised. ChatGPT for writing is gonna be as synonymous, and just and others tasks as well. It's gonna be as synonymous as spell checker and grammar checking is with writing now. It's like if you said to someone that you wrote this document or this dissertation and that you never spell checked it, you never used the built-in spell checker or the grammar checker, they would look at you like you're crazy. It's like it's just obvious that you should do that now.
Yeah.
Like nobody questions it. Whereas back, I'm sure when those tools first came out, there were probably people saying, writers especially, and obviously the news, that this is the end of writing. Any Tom, Dick, and Harry's gonna, just be producing, copy now, but it's just gonna not be of substance. But we know that's not the case because the act of writing has been enhanced, but the process is still a difficult process.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny you say that because I think uh, my experience has been that there's lots of people who will tell me, "Gee, I would like to have written a book," or someday I'm going to write a book. I think the number of people who actually enjoy like writing something as long as a book are pretty few and far between. So I have friends who've also written technical books who describe it as just an awful experience. Like, how did I ever get myself into this thing? And I actually quite like it. I mean, it's to me it's akin to programming, where you can sort of go off by yourself and think about something really hard, and then the hours fly by, and before you know it, it's time for dinner or to go to bed or something like that. But I don't think that's a common thing. I think there's lots of people who uh, either avoid it or get involved in it and just absolutely hate it.
Yeah, I mean, I know what they're talking about. I've published I wrote and published with a publisher 4 books,
Okay.
and like every time I say to myself, why did I start it another one? Like, well, why am
Yeah.
I going through this again? And then it gets completed, it gets published, and I'm sitting there thinking it wasn't that bad. Uh, I don't think the fire, burnt me that much. Didn't hurt that much. I'd do it again. Like that usually, just what ends up happening. But like you said, like it is rare that I think someone really enjoys it to the point where they wrote the whole book, that they'll get through writing it as well. First they'll start, they'll have motivation and the discipline to continue, especially when there's a lot of back and forth from the publisher, and you're busy with other stuff as well, and you've wrote something, you think it's fine, and the publisher's like, there's this and this and this, and then they keep coming back, and you kind of getting annoyed because you're just like, I've already finished this chapter, I'm on the next chapter now, I don't want to have to keep going back. But obviously, that is, the process.
Yeah, that it is a process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So, talking about publishing, what do you think of AI's role within publishing? Because it as simple as you know, checking your spelling, your grammar. So, just that simple side of it, to rewriting text so it's more coherent and it just flows better, to the point where AI is writing the whole book, because that's something that is a very real possibility.
so I think yes to everything you said, and I think you said it probably in the order that is going to come, which is smaller scale things like making the sentences flow better or that kind of stuff, um, up through um, maybe just making, helping you organize the topics, or rewriting paragraphs, all the way up to producing books, which I think is a little further out there. But I think we are really a long way away from, how can I put this? I'll put it to you this way. There is nothing in my books that you could not discover on the internet right now, right? I didn't invent
Mm.
any of this stuff. I didn't, the Clojure programming language, for example, is incredibly well documented. But what my book about Clojure uh, uh, gives is that I have spent enough time with people who are trying to learn Clojure that I understand the particular mental difficulties of trying to learn this language, particularly if you're coming from like a Java or JavaScript background and that kind of thing. And I can present the material in such a way that it's not boring to that person, and get the ideas across to that person who's got that particular background, such that, and I'm not even trying to give them all the information. What I'm trying to do is get them to the starting point where they can then go to Google or whatever and figure out the rest on their own. That is a subtle set of requirements that I think, will AI ever get there? I don't know, probably, right? Like how much time you have. Um, but I think that is a much more difficult and nuanced thing to achieve than here's all the information about Clojure, for example, or functional programming or whatever. So so I think AI will get at least to the point where it can straighten out a bad bit of text and say, oh, this probably flows better, and that kind of thing. But I will say two things are true about the world we live in right now. Thing number one is that the grammar checkers and all of the sort of rule based, the kinds of things that'll help you improve your writing,
Yeah.
hate my writing. They just hate it. Like I run my writing through these things and I get like 10,000 suggestions, all of which sum up to this is bad writing and you should do it
Rewrite it.
differently.
Just
Yes.
write it again.
that is a thing that is true. The other thing that is true is that people quite like my books and they buy them. So,
Mm.
you know, I mean, I'm not the world's most successful author, but people seem to like my books. At least the people they're targeted at, which is sort of the only people I care about. So, both those things are true. And, if certainly I read enough stuff in business, like, you read memos and documents and RFCs that people put out. And I wish to God they would have run them through one of those grammar checkers or,
Mm.
um, but I think, at least when I'm trying to write a book, it's not really, it's a much more social thing than it is
The
a purely
process
intellectual thing.
than the product, than
Yeah,
the end product itself
yeah.
necessarily.
So I don't know. I'm not terribly worried.
Yeah.
Will AI ever get there? Sure, maybe. But I think we're a long way off from an AI that can look at a group of people with a particular background and write something that is appropriate for them and will click with them. That would be cool, right? Because at that point, we will have an AI that we're going to have an interesting conversation with, and then wouldn't be anything wrong with that.
No, and I think that's also really interesting because imagine, let's say if you wrote, a book, for example, a book on Ruby programming, but based on the way that I learn and the way that I interact with a particular platform, it knows that your book, the content itself, is suitable for me, but the way it's written may not, gel with me as well as a certain other type. And it literally rejigs it or rewrites part of it so it's tailor made for me. So it's still your book, but it's a bit more tailored
Yep.
dynamically for the reader, and that could maybe even change as I'm progressing. So like it could start off in a more basic way where it's actually holding my hand, and as I'm progressing somehow it's tracking it, especially if it's linked with some platform like Code Academy. It's saying, okay, he's picking up pace now. We don't, not just existing concepts, but even new concepts. We don't need to explain it in as much depth.
Yeah.
We can reduce it to 60% of the explanation and you'll probably get it, but we can increase the explanation if he seems to be falling off the track a bit. So I think that's very interesting, and I think that's always been the goal with education for the last 100 years, to have tailor-made resources, but it's just too time and costly to do it. But now with computers and AI, that's very, I mean, Khan Academy and other platforms are already doing that to an extent, even pre this new AI wave. But with the
Yeah.
AI itself, it's on the fly, it could potentially be happening
So
or on a conversational basis.
I think there's a categoric error that people make uh, with lots of new technologies, and particularly I think it's happening with AI, which is, there's two things you can do with the new technology. Obviously, a new technology can do the same thing that a person can do, but better, right? So I don't know, I suppose, like the classic example is like weavers, right? You could hand weave a thing, or you could have a weaving machine that could spew out the cloth. And obviously, the weaving machine can make more cloth, better quality, faster than a human being could be. So that is, weaving machine is kind of like a person, only better. But there's another thing that technology can do, which is it can do something that people utterly can't do. I don't know if you've noticed, but we have airplanes, but people can't actually fly by themselves, right? So an airplane gives us the ability to do something that we could never do before, right? Like, got X-ray machines that can see through walls, right? People cannot see through walls. Um, and I think whenever a new technology comes along, there's always this focus on, oh, it's going to replace people because it's going to be a better person. but frequently the more interesting versions of technology, the more interesting applications are doing something that people are completely unable to do. You know, and I don't know what that is for AI, but I really can't wait.
Oh yeah, I think you put it, nicely. It's just already been out. AI will just do what people can already do, but slightly better. And then obviously, if you combine both,
Yeah.
people that understand what you're trying to do, and what needs to be done, and have technical skills, but then also understand how to use the AI, how to leverage it, and then they can marry both. That's and it's what we said, earlier. Somebody now who knows how to use an IDE is more employable on average, and will do better,
Yeah.
I'd say, than somebody that doesn't. That's not talking about, like you said, somebody older like you that's been in the industry for decades. That's totally different. But somebody that's 20, 25, 30, yes, like these new tools, it could be anything. Well, obviously,
Right.
AI is the one that we're discussing right now. But, talking about books, I want to make a little,
Yeah.
prediction. And did you see in the news a few weeks ago that Amazon has limited publishing books on their KDP platform to free books due to the fear of AI books like being published heavily. Plus, also they have a little checkbox now to say, is any part of this book AI generated?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I saw something about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so so what they say with that checkbox is that right now they're just using that for data gathering purposes, research purposes. But my prediction is we're into beginning late 2023 now. I say by within 1 to 3 years, and that's a pretty wide time frame. But obviously, with a big company, sometimes it takes a while for them to fully adopt stuff. I think they will have their own range of AI generated books that will undercut the current market, books. The same way they had products on their website, which they still do, but then once they got data and they started setting up manufacturing and logistics, they started doing Amazon Basics, which apparently, seem to be higher in the rankings.
Yep.
Obviously, I know they've denied any, favoritism there, but we all know how things work with business. And I think there'll be an Amazon Basics or something similar set of AI generated books. Instead of paying 30, 40, £50 for a textbook, you could pay £5, $5, and they will be upfront that it is AI generated. It may not be the same quality level as something that, let's say, you wrote, but it is a lot cheaper. Or they might even have a subscription model where you can subscribe, like how you can do, so a Kindle subscription,
Right.
and access a shit ton of AI generated books and content, and there'll be more added on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned textbooks because I think that goes right to the idea that ChatGPT, for example, made up a resume for me that wasn't really correct as much as it was pleasing to me. Um, but uh,
I
and
think you
it's
should
like
still use it. On April Fool's Day, you should change it just for 24 hours. A link
uh,
it.
it, I a textbook, like in university, right? You buy textbooks and they're wildly expensive,
Oh yeah,
and probably pretty badly written. But what you're
and
really
old and out
buying,
of date as well. A lot of the time.
yeah. But what you're really buying is like this is the authoritative statement by a person that people respect on astrophysics or whatever it is, and that is exactly what you're not getting from the current crop of AI. And I say the current crop, right, could change tomorrow, but the the whole indictment of the current state of AI today in 2023 is that a lot of it is baloney, you know?
Yes, it is.
And and uh, uh, I I certainly so your scenario where you could, for example, buy a textbook and it's much cheaper because it's AI generated, that would be lovely because I think it's terrible that textbooks are so expensive and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, boy, we really, really would need to know that AI has gotten better at talking about astrophysics before we rely on AI generated astrophysics textbooks, for example.
Oh yeah.
Forget astrophysics. How about a dentistry textbook, an AI generated dentistry textbook? Would you go to that dentist, right?
Yeah, so true. But it goes back to what we were saying, that it's gonna be the marriage between the human and the AI, because this is the question, Russ. Is it quicker to read a book on average, or is it quicker to write a book? We know the answer: quicker to read a book. So
Yes.
if let's say the AI generated it in 30 minutes, and it was it's some basic checks are done on it, seems good, and then it's handed over to a professional to go through. They go through it and they're like, okay, there's these 5 points which are just totally incorrect, they need to be rewritten, or I'll even rewrite them.
Yeah.
And there are these
Yeah.
10 points that can just generally be improved. They're not quite there, they're overall, but the rest of it's fine. That is like a winning combo, like that
Yeah.
right there. Instead of having to sit there. And I think that'll open up the possibility of getting people to, part write a book
Yeah.
that never would have done it because of the laborious process of writing a book. But now they have to just read a book and just verify it, and they might have
Yep.
free independent people doing it along with some computer technology as well, to make sure one person didn't miss it or any biases weren't present. But I think that's going to be a solid combination.
All right. I think I'm on board. Should we form the company next week or wait until next year?
I think we should end the podcast now, and we should form it now. Let's call. Actually, what would you name, if hypothetically, if you was to create an AI generative company? What would you name it?
Oh my goodness! Now you're asking hard questions. I don't know.
Yeah, you can either
What
go
would
down the route of making it a super technical name, which probably isn't long term good, or a more simple name that will probably be better
so?
marketing wise long term.
So I've worked in the closure world, clojure, for a long time, and I've always said that the best name for anything in a closure world, like a project name or whatever, the ideal name is one that I can hear and have no idea how to spell, and write out and have no idea how to pronounce. And closure is full. The closure world is full of those kind of names. So you're asking completely the wrong person to name something.
Yeah, I mean, it would would definitely be interesting. But yeah, I think AI is definitely going to be very very interesting. I mean, in your current day to day job, are you seeing any talks or discussions within your company of leveraging these tools or looking into them, or is it still a matter of it's a thing, it's happening, but we're not looking into it yet?
So I don't want to talk to my company, but just in general, everyone is talking about this. We get on this podcast, and I'm going to talk about programming in the last 30 years or something, and the fact that AI comes up does not surprise me at all. Like the whole world is talking about this and trying to get their arms around it. And again, and from my point of view, there's a lot of irrational exuberance and also unjustified pessimism, right? Like the truth is usually somewhere in the middle there, and the trick is to figure out where the truthful middle lies. But yeah, I it's going to be an important thing simply because ChatGPT, as it stands right here in October of 2023, is a step forward. And anybody who denies that is not actually looking. Um, but to say that where we are right now is sort of that the world has like fundamentally changed right now, I think is also a mistake. I think the potential is there for huge changes. We're just not quite there yet, and we're watching it play out in real time.
Oh yeah, 100%. Before we move on from AI, what I find interesting about what ChatGPT is doing and like the areas of interest right now, they're not the areas that you would have commonly thought about AI or what people thought it was gonna. It was always that thing. It's gonna take over the manual jobs.
Yeah,
Driving a vehicle. Stacking shelves or whatever it is. A lot of the right now it's going not after, but it's really targeting the technical aspects, basically the thing that's not physical and is intellectual. It's really geared up for that right now, and I think that's something that I don't think people would have predicted 5 to 10 years ago if you spoke about AI and work the best or worst case, however you look at it, scenario for the impact on the economy. A lot of the time they would have gone after those other type of jobs, driving a lorry, stacking shelves, delivering parcels, that sort of stuff. And though obviously AI is benefiting that, it's benefiting it on the technical side, not on the manual side of things as much.
yeah. I don't know. I think so. I don't know the answer to this, but the question is that as it gets so the penalty for a self-driving car making a mistake is very high and very immediate,
Yes.
right? Like if you got a self-driving car that does something bad, everybody's going to know about it, and perhaps people be injured. Where it's just less obvious. Like, I don't know, if you had an AI lawyer, certainly if it makes a mistake, it could do some horrific damage, but it's not going to be as obvious and hit the front page as much. But you know, the AI is going to get better, and I suspect it's going to get better at lawyering or something else intellectual about at the same rate it's getting better at driving a car. Like that is the thing that we've made the step forward with, is there's some kind of forward progress in sort of general intelligence. We're not there yet, but it seems like we've taken a step in that direction. um, and so I don't know if this will happen, but I can imagine a world where suddenly it's good enough that it can drive a car reliably, without people freaking out, and also do things like, the basic clerk work in a lawyer's office or something like that. And we would all have faith in it.
Oh yeah, it is an inevitability. So, what advice would you give to someone, from your last 4 decades of being in the industry, having worked for multiple organizations, done loads of things from conferences, panels, talks, this podcast, writing books, being a programmer in the early days, all that sort of stuff. What advice would you give to someone, especially someone that's looking to become a programmer right now?
Um, well, let's see. Well, one thing is that I think people don't realize, particularly people coming out of the university, like if that's the path you're taking, um, people come out thinking that there's like 5 or 10 job categories, and that's it. But in fact, when you get into the industry, right, there's like a million different jobs. Every single job for every company is a little different, and you really need, I think the most successful people, certainly it's been true for me, and I think it's been true for the people around me who've been happy in their careers. They make the decision this way: what are the things that I enjoy doing that make me happy, and then let me find a job doing that. Right? Obviously, when you're first starting out, that's harder. You're just kind of looking for a job, right?
Yeah.
But um, at a certain point, as you gain experience, you can actually drive your career in the sense that you can drive a car. You can learn about the things you're interested in, and learn about, and dig into the things that you feel like you're better at and the things that make you happy, and sort of push your career in the directions that will make you happy. And I think people starting out, they tend to talk a lot about the job market, or what's the job market for this and what's the job market for Java programmers or whatever. You don't work for the job market. You just need one job, right? The job market is like 10 million jobs and 9.5 million developers or something. You just need one job. So there tends to be, you know, it's not like you can pursue your dreams and there will always be a job there. But if you intelligently steer your career towards the things that you actually like doing, you are a lot more likely to end up doing things that you want to do. If you don't know where you're going, you are unlikely to get there.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I 100% agree.
and then I think the absolute key thing, and I did not realize this for a long, long, long time, um, is that if you were an engineer or really any other professional, you have this little business. You are selling your services to other businesses, probably bigger businesses. So at a certain point, I started thinking of myself as like Russ Incorporated, and the businesses that you are selling your services to, they could be full of nice people, and most of them are, and they could mean the best in the world, and most of them do. But businesses are not teams, they're not families, they're not your home, they are profit making enterprises. And the same thing is true of you,
Mm.
that your job is fundamentally a business relationship. And the thing that sort of makes me crazy about modern corporate culture is when companies start talking about business, about teams and family and home, and we're all in this
Culture and
together.
workplace, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, they do, and the thing is, they're in it together whilst things are good. But if it's, I think it's a good thing, that you've raised, because as soon as it benefits them to get rid of you, you and I would say, depending on the person who's doing it, with whatever excuse they need to, they will. And
Yes.
yeah, and a lot of people, unfortunately, they do get sucked into having a good manager most of the time, or the environment's good, or the colleagues are good, or they enjoy the work, and they that they feel like they owe the company something. Again, it's not about screwing the company over, but one, being open to new opportunities, but two, also on the flip side, not taking things too personally when things
Right.
are, maybe said by the manager, to you. Sometimes it's not really about you, it's just about whatever's going on in your manager's, career and life right now. But also, like, find, some, like, be willing to do what's best for you. Like, so many times I hear people say, I can't do that, I can't switch, or, I need to make sure this gets done because, the company's good to me, or, whatever, whatever, whatever. And it's like, to an extent, but they will get rid of you when that opportunity arises, that it is better to not have you there. And that's not a comment on your ability, that's just a comment on their situation and what their the perceived nature is of that situation.
It is it's exactly what you're saying. It is a business relationship between two businesses, and the one business, the employer, as you say, and the minute it becomes undesirable for them to keep you around, you will no longer be around. And the but the flip side of that, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way the world works. The the thing that individuals have to keep in mind is that the same thing is true for them, that they should always be thinking about the next thing or the other thing that I might be doing. And that's, difficult and painful sometimes. But if, it needs to be a symmetrical relationship. right? The companies certainly understand they are employing you because it is to their advantage to employ you. And you need to make that symmetrical. I'm working for a company because it is to my advantage to work for this company. And that's great. Everybody understands the rules, everyone understands what the situation is, and it's a happy, productive relationship. The thing that makes me a little crazy sometimes is when companies start talking about families or home or teams and things like that. And it's like that is a PR effort to obscure what is fundamentally a a fine business relationship. It's trying to obscure the facts in the world. And the best employees are the people who have an absolutely clear idea of where they stand with their company.
Oh yeah, and within their life, their relationships, their
Yeah,
their age, all that stuff. Like 100% understanding that and knowing when you're no longer suitable for that company. Whether it's just you need to move on, like you've advanced and
yeah,
the company's not advancing you enough, or you want something different. And you've got the skills or the experience to do something different, and yeah, that's something that I have discussions with people, and like most people, they just do not understand that. I find a lot of people, they just bury their head in the sand, and they do not want to hear it, or they do not want to believe that, or like companies can be this cold, or that people within the companies can be this cold. And it's like, it is just unfortunately that way. And it's only unfortunate because you don't realize it and then take the necessary steps to, factor that in. It's like, if you just talk about it from a pure money perspective, if you lost $100, you wouldn't care if you had $10 million. You care when you have $10. You care when you have $100 and you lose 100. It's because you put all your eggs in that basket. You
right.
have not created savings, you investments, or you haven't got a backup. Whereas if, let's say, you're in a job and maybe it's just the industry as a whole, if you're constantly learning and at the side, over years you're developing your skills, and you're like, when the time's right, or when I'm no longer, I can no longer be at this company or in the industry, I'll just switch. When you're in that position, it becomes less emotional, and it's like, okay, I need to switch now. It is what it is.
Yep. And I will say that, most, maybe all of my best friends at this point in my life are people that I've worked with, and people can be loyal, and I am certainly loyal to my friends, and I am lucky that I have a circle of friends who are just an important point in my life and that I love and cherish. And most of those people I met working, you can be loyal and care about people, less so about companies. Companies are businesses. They run by a set of rules. And again, none of this is bad. You just need to have your eyes open and understand the relationships, you know?
Oh yeah, 100%. And it is that thing of realizing the situation, and that's where people really go wrong. They don't understand the real, relationship, the real dynamic, and it is a big PR campaign by companies, by industries, where, like you said, they use these terms like, you're a family, we're going to be open and honest, we're going to be candid. When you hear these, CEOs talk, say these terms, and everyone's just believing what they're saying. And when they start saying stuff like, we don't care about money, but yet they always trying to beat their previous quarter, beat their previous year. And it's like to an
Yeah.
extent you do, like to an extent that there are things, and again, it is just that thing that we've just been hammering down, that they're gonna care about those things, but they just don't admit they do, because it's kind of perceived as
Yeah.
bad. And they make you feel comfortable, and that's what they want. But as soon as it's the opportunity arises, you are you know gone.
The,
But it's
the,
something you have to realize as an individual.
Yeah, every time I hear some company going on about how they're a family or something, there's a famous line in American politics where some politician said, "Every time you say that, I want to reach down and make sure my wallet is still there." And that is kind of how I feel about statements about being one big happy family. And you know I'm not talking about a particular company. I am talking about companies in general and employers in general. This idea that they try and obscure what are the realities of life that everyone understands. And again, there's nothing bad about this. It's just it is, and you are much better off recognizing the reality than not.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to a broader problem we have as humans. In when you look at politics, when you look at war, when you look at whatever the economy or whatever it is, people, they just don't want to see what's in front of them and what isn't that hard to see. Because in the moment it benefits them to be ignorant. It is easier to be ignorant. That term, that saying, ignorance is bliss.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's like, obviously I mean, you've got to kind of have a balance, because you can't always be, let's say if you're working at a company, you can't spend 5 years working there and thinking your manager's out to get you, thinking that they don't care about you. Like, obviously you understand that's the case, but you can't have that thought always in your mind every single second of
right,
every
right.
single day. Like, you've got to get that balance, otherwise you're just destroying, yourself. Like, you've got it's like if you know the difference between you saying there's no suffering going on in Africa and there's no starving people, no people, without war, like everyone's fine, versus every moment of every single day
Yeah,
you worrying about it because you've seen an advert or an article, but there's nothing that you can actually do about it necessarily. Like, it's kind of different if that's you're within some sort of relief effort and that's what you're actually working on. But if you're not even working on that, and like you got to get a balance of knowing it, thinking about it, but then moving on as well.
yeah. As a manager, um, the easiest people for me to manage are the people who understand basic things like, you know, gee, I'm an employee of this company, and I'm trying to be decent to the people around me, and I hope my manager is decent to me because that's just a better way to be a human being. But fundamentally, I'm working hard because I'm trying to make the company successful. Why am I trying to make the company successful? Because if they're not successful, they might fire me. you
Yeah,
know and and it's again, it's like a completely unemotional acceptance of reality. And those are absolutely the easiest people to manage because it tends to be a little less emotional. Gee, I need you to work on this project that maybe you're not that excited about. The person can make up their mind. Do I want to work on this project, or is it so bad for me that I need to do something else? If you need to do something else, that's okay too. I'm sorry we won't be working together anymore, but it's okay. It's just a better way to operate than the idea that somehow we're a family and you're going to leave the family, or it's a different dimension of life than family and teams and all the rest of it. Um, yeah,
yeah. Like, I mean, there's like how you say, there's a difference between being honest of the real situation and kind of basically trying to deceive your employees using perks, and just certain words to persuade them to do the work. Like, you can have unlimited food, you can have these nap pods and all these other things and all these other company benefits that basically just, let's say in Silicon Valley, just keep you in the office after hours, because it's like, oh, free food, I'll save some money, all this sort of
yeah,
stuff. And, Wi-Fi on the company bus that picks you up from your house, so I don't save money on travel. But then obviously I'm with colleagues, so I'm probably going to talk about work. because there's free Wi-Fi. Obviously now with 3G, 4G, and 5G, it's, I say, less of an issue, but it's still to have like good consistent connection and let's say charging outlets, all that stuff. Instead of being honest and saying, obviously the more you put into this, the more you'll get out, and part of that is pay rises, bonuses, positions in the company that you otherwise won't be able to, and part of it is still being able to stay versus not being able to stay. I think you may turn away, or like certain people will turn away because they don't like to hear the reality. But I think you'll get, like you said, people that are very loyal in a different way because they'll understand the situation and they'll, you're having a proper, honest conversation with them. And, the example that you're saying of there's a new project coming on. And if not directly to them, but if you just say in general to your employees that obviously the more projects that you're taking on, or the more you're willing to take on this, project that you may not be comfortable with, the more it's likely going to benefit you in your bonus, in your success at this company. And it's kind of an unsaid thing in most companies, but that is the reality.
Yeah, and again, I think that if from the employee's point of view, if they're looking at it as, oh yeah, the benefits outweigh the rewards, and this is in the mean better for me. Great, do it. But you'll do it. Maybe it's a project you're going to hate, but you'll do it a little more cheerfully because you've kind of weighed the pluses and minuses and said, it's not a great project, but it's all worth it in the end. Eh, Or, hey, it's not a great project, and I've got a better opportunity. I'll see you. Um, that's a much better way of dealing with things than, I think it's, simply getting pissed off that you're assigned to a bad project, right? Uh, Work is full of frustrations and things like that, but no one's holding a gun to your head. And I think, there's the economic realities of whether you can actually change jobs and all that kind of stuff. But you shouldn't create artificial boundaries like, oh, I have to stay at this company because we're a family. No, no, actually, you're not. You know,
Yeah.
and if you have real friends at the company, I have lunch regularly with someone I worked with in the 1990s, right? Your actual friends are sort of, the definition is they keep you around even when you're not working together. I guess is one definition of a real friend. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the best definitions of a real friend. When they don't have, they choose to see you when they don't have to see you. They
Yeah.
have to see you in the office or on, Teams or whatever. Like they have to do that interaction then. But if they're like, they text you, say, I'm free this weekend. I've got a couple of hours. Would you like to hang out? Obviously, if you're living in a different country, that's different. But if you're like half an hour away, if you want to grab a bite to eat, you want to do this, you want to do that, that's, like I said, the more definition of a real friend. And you can just see that. And also, even when you're at the company, you can see, are you hanging out with this person on a regular basis outside of work? If you're not, you're probably not that,
Right. Right.
much strong friends with them. They're work friends, and you may not mind hanging out with them. Like you might not mind their company, but if you're not actively trying to hang out with them, or they're not actively trying to hang out with you outside of that work environment, then how much of a real friend are they? And that's not to say they're bad. That's
Right.
just to say they don't have a significant part in your life, and vice versa.
Yes, and I guess to sum up, my advice is to like find the things that make you happy and try and steer your career that way, and just keep in mind that it's a business relationship when you're working for a company, and in the end, you are trying to run the me incorporated business, and you need to steer that business in the way that is best for the one and only stockholder of that business, which is you. Um,
Oh yeah.
to beat the analogy into the ground there.
Oh yeah. So before we wrap up today's podcast, Russ, what I always do is ask a bunch of rapid fire fun questions. Are you
Okay,
ready for them?
I guess I am.
Okay. So if you was to run your own company, would you rather run a 10-person company or a 1,000-person company, and why?
Oh, a 10-person company, hands down. A 10-person company, you can get to know all the people. You can, figure out. Well, let me back up. There is a world of difference between a company where you know everyone and can operate that way, and a company where you need to hire people who who know their little slot of the company. And to back up a little bit, I am a firm believer in I'm as smart as I am, you are as smart as you are. If we get together, we're almost twice as smart as we would be individually. If you get three people together, it's more like two and a half. Four people, it's more like 3.1. And somewhere around seven or eight, it starts going negative, right? Large groups of people will do stupid things that no single individual will ever do. And I'd rather not fight that. I'd rather have a 10-person company.
Oh yeah. Plus, also the 10-person company is more likely to be a family than that 1,000-person company. If you want to talk about it from that perspective,
Yeah,
more
yeah,
likely.
yeah. It,
Yeah.
it will be friendlier, maybe,
Yeah.
has the
Yes.
potential. Yeah.
Yeah. To an extent, obviously, at 10-person, chances are they're probably not all co-founders. So there's people
Yeah.
that are hired. When it's all co-founders, you can, to an extent, kind of create a family environment when like they're all directors and they're all got a similar share.
Yeah.
At that point, it does become, and partly just because it's harder to get rid of each other.
Well,
That's the other thing.
the other thing is that with a 10-person company, I could look each of the other nine people in the eye and say, this is a business, and we are here to, operate the business. And if you decide to leave, that's okay, but it's not going to hurt my feelings. So, going back to the previous thing.
Oh yeah. So next question: would you rather have $5 million upfront or $500,000 a year for the rest of your life, and why?
Um, well, I'm pretty old, so uh, I that's a great question. Um, yeah, I think I'm going to last 10 years and maybe longer. I'd take the $500,000 a year, and I don't have any deep reason for it except that uh, probably in 5 years I could think of something better to do with the money than if I had it all up front.
Fair enough. Favorite board game, favorite video game, and favorite movie.
Start with the last one first. My favorite movie is um it's probably actually Deepwater Horizon is my favorite movie. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's actually based on a true story, but it's about a disastrous explosion and fire on a oil well out like an ocean oil well out in the Gulf of Mexico. And I love it because it focuses on like the regular sort of people working on this oil well, and sort of how mostly they just dealt with this catastrophe with uh, courage and grace. And I think we don't have enough films about sort of ordinary people dealing with stuff. It tends to be, if you think of all the popular movies, they're either about superheroes or these great people. And I think the real greatness is just sort of in the sort of average person who tries to get along in their life. My favorite video game, I haven't really. I've sort of fallen out of the habit of playing. Probably Kerbal Space Program. I quite like Kerbal Space Program. Very very low key and sort of undirected. And my favorite board game is I hate board games with a passion. I am the only living programmer on earth who hates board games. So, but I do hate them a lot.
Okay, I mean, why is that? Like, there's a difference between you just don't play them, you're not that into them, but to like, like that hatred sounds strong.
Yeah, well, I have played board games, but it is like not the first thing I would do, and it's probably not the 85th thing that I would do. And I don't. So the deep psychological reason is probably because I'm the youngest child, and so I always lost the board games. Um, but what I tell myself is that board games exercise exactly the same part of my mind that programming does. And I get so much more out of programming than moving the little thingy around the board. It's funny, many years ago, a friend of mine actually created a board game. It was a board game based on NASCAR racing, which we have in the US. And he needed someone to edit the very thick instruction book that came with this board game. So he found me and he talked me into editing his instruction book. And his reasoning was that if I could get through the instruction book hating board games, then it would be a good instruction booklet. So
Fair enough. So, I mean, the next question I usually ask is, what video game are you looking forward to the most, and what movie are you looking forward to the most?
So video game, I haven't really, yeah, as I say, I still haven't seen Oppenheimer, so that is the movie that I'm looking forward to the most right now. I'm sort of behind the times here, but that's the one I'm looking forward to.
Okay, I mean, it was a good movie. I watched that when it, came out.
Yeah,
I mean, Nolan movies always are.
yeah. Did you see Barbie at the same time? That's the real question.
Not the same time I watched it. I think like 2 3 days earlier. So
Okay.
it seemed like I wasn't one of those ones that did the Barbenheimer or whatever. Like going from one into the other. I haven't done more than one movie on a single day since I think 2020. I want to say before I got married. I don't think I've done it after marriage. Partly, I don't think my wife would want to do that much in terms of movie outside other than one. But also when we go out, like for a movie, for example, there's usually other things we end up doing as well. So like either food or maybe some other activity, or with like if we're near somewhere, like IKEA or Costco, so we'll do that as well. So a movie doesn't end up just being the 2 hours plus the travel to and there. There's other stuff that gets
Yeah,
baked into it. And when you have kids, it's like like so trying to watch 2 3 movies at cinema becomes difficult.
I'm familiar.
Yeah. So last question, it's a two-parter. Does money buy you happiness, and what does a good life mean to you?
Money does not buy you happiness, but uh, it can ease the way, right? Like the only people who don't really care about money are people who have enough of it. Um, so can't buy you happiness, but it can certainly clear the road a bit. And what's a good life? I don't know. Couldn't we have started with that question? That seems like a big question. A good life. I don't know. I think spending your time doing things that you enjoy doing and having a circle of people around who like you and you like them and that sort of thing. So I think because what are we? We're the things that we spend our time doing, and we're the people around us. So for me, it's like getting those two things right is the secret to a good life.
Fantastic. So I just want to thank you, Russ, for coming on to FireDEV today. It's been an honor talking to you, and a great experience as well.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been really my pleasure.
And finally, thank you for everyone listening. Stay tuned for next week's episode of FireDEV, and have a good night. Bye bye.